Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Fort Knox, a pre-Civil War granite fortification, is located on the narrows of the Penobscot River in Bucksport, Maine. Built in the mid-1800s, the fort is known as Maine's Castle and is one of the largest forts of its type in the world. Not many things have changed since the construction ended in the 1860s, and it is one of the best preserved historical buildings on the New England coast. You may ask, why is there this massive granite fortification sitting on a river in the middle of nowhere? But there is a reason. Before the fort was constructed, Prospect had been attacked multiple times by the British Navy. After 3 successive attacks on the region, where the British pillaged and burnt cities in the area, the locals were fed up. They petitioned the government, and in the early 1800s, they got a confirmation that they were getting a fort.
Who decided to build the fort? Why was it put there in the first place?
Yeah, so, okay, that's kind of there's a long answer to that.
Good.
It was for the site, and I think we were sort of going through this the other day, because again, it's been it's been for about 4 or 5 years since I wrote the book, so some of my history about it is a little rough, but in 1779, during the Revolutionary War, that spot was first used as kind of a viewing spot for the Revolutionary War by Paul Revere. So it continued to be a site that was good for during battles, I guess. So it was sort of from an early part of our country, it was chosen as a good spot. But then, and as far as who, there were a series of politicians, but it was mainly the people in the area who wrote letters to the government requesting they wanted a fort and they wanted protection. Yeah, and so from then on, it was, I think, the Army Corps of Engineers worked together, and there were lots. But Lieutenant Isaac Stevens, was the one who was primarily responsible for building it.
And he sure did a good job. The fort still stands, a vast expanse of Mount Waldo granite and Maine forged steel. While the fort is little worse for wear and is missing the majority of its ornament, it is still one of the most impressive fortifications in Maine. There was possibly a Native American burial site under the fort, but while this was important at the time, the building of the fort mattered much more to the people of Bucksport and to the U.S. government. Throughout its nearly 20-year construction period, the U.S. government spent more than $1 million on the fort. This money went directly into the local economy, and while the fort was not really needed by the time construction started, its presence benefited the economy of the area greatly.
Do you think that the fort has played a useful role in Maine's history, and how did it affect jobs and the economy?
What did it do to the economy?
Well, one thing I found interesting when I was researching, when it was being built, there weren't a lot of stoneworkers in the area. So they kind of recruited a whole bunch of stoneworkers from Europe, from mostly Ireland and England and Scotland. And so it brought over a lot of families that ended up living here. So it helped in that way. It definitely employed a lot of people. The quarry that harvested all of the granite.
This is at Mount Waldo, right?
Yep, and that is, the quarry from, the granite from that quarry was used in tons of buildings throughout the country. I think I've got a list, I can't remember offhand. The State House, and there's a
one of those buildings in Washington.
Yes, right? I think the post office, the National Post Office, things like that. So there were a lot of quarry workers who were employed, and engineers. So I think it definitely, and it took 20 years to build.
The fort, which was a huge U.S. government expenditure, was not very useful. While possibly having deterred the British from launching another invasion, the fort really did very little for the area, especially since its construction started a few years after a treaty was signed with England to establish the Canadian border in Maine. However, as a key part of the Third System forts, a line of forts that covered Maine, it was necessary to build the fort to ensure suitable protection of the Maine coast. The fort was built as a test bed for many new and unique features and was constructed to be a powerhouse capable of taking out any Navy ship for the next 20 years. However, in a region with declining importance and little threat of invasion, the 100-plus Rodman guns are next to useless. The resources used to build the fort were more useful somewhere else. Okay, do you feel like the fort wasn't needed in the Penobscot Narrows and could it have been more useful somewhere else?
That's a hard question. I think at the time that, I think after the War of 1812, there was a lot of fear for the residents, and there was a lot of uncertainty between the British and the French and the Native Americans. So I can understand why they wanted to build a fort here. And at that point of the river, there was a lot of traffic. Bangor at that time was really bustling, and the lumber barons and the ships were coming through. So it does make sense of where it was situated. So I think by the time they actually started to build it, it probably, every year that they spent on it, it probably made less and less sense to kind of keep going. And they finished it, around the Civil War.
Yeah.
And at that point, there were some skirmishes in Maine, and there were things happening, but I don't.
What's going to go on there?
Yeah, I don't think so. It was quite as important.
While the fort never fired a shot in anger, it is still very important to the region. When the fort was deemed excess property by the U.S. government sometime around the start of the 20th century, it was bought by the state of Maine for just over $2,000. Access to the fort was unrestricted, and the area became a popular picnic spot and a good place to hang out for the local residents. Maine's castle quickly became one of the biggest reasons for tourists to come to the Bucksport area, and it has been this way since the 30s. The recently built Penobscot Narrows Bridge Observatory Tower has brought a lot of attention to the area, bringing in over 500,000 visitors a year. Built in 2008, it is the largest bridge observatory in the world, and at 447 feet overlooks a massive double-pillar suspension bridge, Fort Knox, and the whole area around Bucksport. Has having the observatory benefited the fort?
No, I feel like having the two sites together probably benefits the fort, but they do get a lot of visitors throughout the season, and it's I think people come primarily to see the fort. I think a lot of people are interested in American history, and it's a great place to bring your family and have a picnic and then go to the Narrows. So combining the two.
We saw a lot of people.
Yeah.
And a bunch of school groups.
Yes,
a lot of
school groups, and they have a lot of special events. They have a Shakespeare festival and a pirate festival and a medieval festival, and so they do a lot of other events. And the haunted fort. Not the haunt. Is that what it's? Fright at the Fort. Sorry. During Halloween, which brings in tons and tons of people.
That looks pretty scary.
Yeah.
In recent years, an event called Fright at the Fort has been occurring within the bounds of the fort. Besides paranormal activities, this is the spookiest thing that occurs at the fort, and you can expect a good scare from all those ghouls and ghosts. There is also a lot of alleged paranormal activity, and our interviewee, Liza Walsh, has witnessed some of this firsthand.
Alright, any cool things you want to add?
Let's see. Do you want to hear more about the ghost experiences?
Sure.
Well, so I spent most of a night in the fort and with the East Coast ghost hunters, and they have found a ghost family that they've kind of created. They've taken a picture, infrared picture, of the front of the fort that shows this ghost family in front of them. and they've actually, using their ghost tools, they've had conversations with a little girl and with a couple of other generals. So they've definitely had contact with spirits.
Wow.
And then I've heard things. I've heard footsteps when I was with them. I heard a ball, like a cannonball rolling up above us. We were in the officers' quarters, you know, the part with the museum. So right above that, there was like a ball rolling above us. And then when Daphne, my youngest daughter, and I were there one time, we were walking. We're in the little dungeon kind of is, you know, outside. We were walking around that corner. It's really dark. We made our flashlight and smelled cigar smoke at the same time.
Wow.
So then, yeah, you're not allowed to smoke in there. That was probably a ghost. So it's definitely creepy.
So there we have it. Fort Knox has many identities: a main state historic site, a spooky event center, and a massive watchtower, forever guarding the Penobscot Narrows. No matter how you look at it, however, the fort will continue to live on for hundreds of years, and its presence will continue to influence generations of young Mainers.